Hi ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mennie. I'm doing a live podcast today here at the Landlord Show. My podcast is Mennie Talks. The guest that we've got with us today is Simon Jordan, former Crystal Palace chairman, youngest chairman in the Premier League at the time. So welcome to the stage, Simon. Do you want to come up?
Afternoon.
So Simon, as I said, this is a podcast, Mennie Talks. The Landlord Show have asked us to do a podcast and run through some questions with yourself.
Okay.
It's great for you to come down.
No worries.
Today there's a lot of property investors in the arena, so we will touch on property. But what we're going to be talking about mainly is Simon's track record of being an entrepreneur, his track record of working in the media, and also his track record of working the boardroom and undergoing some tough conversations at such a young age, because he was rightly one of the youngest chairmen in the Premier League at the time. So thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Nice to be here.
So if we kick off, Simon, in terms of, as a young age, what was it about yourself, that got you to where you was? Could you see a flair of entrepreneurship in the beginning, or?
I think if people start thinking of themselves of an entrepreneur, then most of the time those aren't the people that are entrepreneurs. I think the main focus is to try and achieve things and apply yourself and have the discipline and motivation to understand your industry and to look at all the verticals within the confines of it. My particular sector, I built the second largest mobile phone company in this country, built it in 5 years, never borrowed any money, never had any investors, never had an overdraft, and sold it for just under 100 million quid when I was 30. And
what age did you start that business at?
26.
26, okay.
And like most things in life, success is like an iceberg. You only see the top part of it.
Yeah.
Most of the failures and the challenges in life are beneath the surface, and those are the subject matter, and those are the substance of being able to build something. So when your intellectual capital was at a certain level, when your drive, your determination, a bit of maturity, but also the industry. You've got to be in an industry that lends itself to being either expansive in its opportunity or expansive in your thinking. In my time with mobile telephony, you had Charles Dunstan, you had John Caldwell, and you had myself. They were different animals to me, with a different outlook and a different disposition. I built 257 retail shops in 5 years with a very focused and determined mindset. I thought my staff were my biggest asset and my biggest liability in equal measure. And so I was very driven. And I think in order to be successful in whatever the sector, A, you've got to know what you're talking about. B, you've got to understand the metrics of the industry. And C, you've got to be determined to do more than the next guy's prepared to do.
Yeah, so what made you get into that industry? When you talk about that industry, there were some big players in that industry already. So what made you think that was the right decision for you, or was it just the opportunity at the time?
It was a combination of a variety of things. It was an industry that was expanding in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, early 2000s. It was a sector that presented huge opportunity. I came from a tech background. I'd studied. My father had been a professional footballer. I'd gone and signed for Chelsea. I'd also played tennis to a high level, but they weren't going to be my end game. And so I wanted to be successful. And I didn't look at success being measured in the quantum of cash. I looked at success in terms of what I could achieve and how I could build and how I would overcome obstacles. Because I think in any sector, whether it's the property sector or whether it's retail or whether it's magazines that I've owned or whether it's football clubs, and they've all come with their challenges and they've all come with their distressed moments. It's about what you're prepared to do to overcome the obstacles. It's what you're prepared to do to look at the fact. A lot of people in life, and you guys have got challenged in your particular sector for a variety of reasons, whether it's raising interest rates or government intervention and regulation and so on and so forth. It's about what you're prepared to do to overcome the adversity of that particular moment. Some people use it as a reason for stopping. Other people use it, an obstacle, as something you overcome, you go through, you go over, but you don't stop at. And sometimes you have to pause and consolidate. And consolidation can be for a passage of time or avoiding certain investments or certain strategies that you may have deployed in better times. but it's about overcoming adversity, because there is no business that's a straight line.
Yeah.
There's no business that goes in a linear direction of vertical opportunities.
As you said about failures, you know, when you was young and when you just come out of school,
Yep.
talking about your father was a professional footballer, you was playing. Obviously, what made you at that young age want to keep pushing on? Was it the failures?
Yeah, I mean, everyone fails.
Yeah.
It's
But
not
some
about...
people don't like failing. It turns them off and they go down a different path.
Yeah, but
Did it motivate you?
Sure, but that's about the character of the individual, isn't it? It's about the substance. You know, everybody gets on and everybody goes in the right direction if they're winning.
Yeah.
It's about when you encounter adversity. I think you learn more from failures than you do from successes. Now, not ad infinitum. You can't keep failing,
Yeah, yeah.
because what you'll learn is that you're a loser and you're not going to get an opportunity to keep on putting yourself in a position where there may be an opportunity for you to be successful. But I think if you fail, then you know what it looks like. You know what the pitfalls of it are. Now, when I was 21, 22, I started a mobile telephone business with a friend of mine. I lost a couple of million quid, put me right on my arse, and I went to America for 18 months to reevaluate myself, to try and set up an environmental, reusable business in the early 90s, which was 25 years ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
And what I learned very quickly was that the only safety net I had was my own arse. And so I priced in the ability to be able to compensate for other people's inadequacies by never dropping my standards and bringing people to my level rather than me descending to theirs. So to answer your question, I guess it must have engendered a spirit of, I'm not going to be defeated by that. But notwithstanding that, at the time, when you are losing and not winning, and I've had both success and failures in equal measure, there's nothing that you enjoy about it. You don't sit there and think that old bullshit expression of what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. You know, the next person that says that to someone like me, I'm going to give them a punch in the face because they haven't been down that route. But you do learn character, and you do learn the ability to disseminate information and to be able to see the challenges of whether an industry is going in a certain way, whether you're overextended, whether you're being foolhardy, or whether you've got to bite down in your gum shield, to take a boxing expression, and be able to see your way through a difficult period. I suspect like you guys are in the property market right now.
Yeah. As a businessman and an investor, you're touching on the property market. Do you see that there's viable investment opportunities right now in the coming future?
I think you've got a challenged space, but I think like in anything that's distressed, tragically, that's not me saying it from a glib, trite point of view. You know, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. In this instance, the guys with cash that can weather out this storm. Interest rates are what they are, and they will be that way, I suspect, for another 18 months. It depends what marketplace you're talking about. If I'm in the retail sector in terms of buying property to sell it rather than to let it, you're going to have opportunities.
Yeah.
And if you've got cash in a distressed marketplace, those opportunities are going to manifest themselves. If you're in the buy-to-let space, well, you've got a perfect storm. You've got government regulation.
Yep.
You've got the idea that tenants need to be protected more. And you've got things like ombudsman coming in to start talking about how landlords should behave. Some of that's right, and some of it's a necessity, but some of it also is a nonsense. So to answer your question, in this uncertain world that we live in, for all the reasons that we know, Reece, it will present opportunity.
There will be opportunity.
And that opportunity will be in distressed spaces.
Yeah.
And that means that if you pick your time, if you've got an existing portfolio and you can stand some of the consequences of the situation that you find yourself in now, you'll be able to come out the back end stronger, and you'll see some of the wheat and the chaff, some of the chaff being cut away. And if you're in the marketplace to buy property, it hasn't landed yet. I tried to buy a couple of properties up in the north of England the other day, and I was really surprised that people were getting asking price straight out of the gate. And I think that will change in the next 6 months.
And it will continue to change.
I think it will change for the next I think it will change between where we are politically, because we've got a very fluid situation with post-COVID, the challenges around the European Union Brexit situation, the desire for a different view towards the marketplace, from taxation through to investment structures, through to the tenancy marketplace. But again, like in any marketplace, no one said it was going to be easy, People that have been in this space, that have had very low interest rates for a long time, have been, in my view, without being too arrogant to your sector, have had it very good for a long time. The old expression of people have been getting drunk on low interest rates and are now suffering a hangover is real, but it will present opportunities. And it's those guys that are able to be fleet of foot and have a little bit of cash around them and a little bit of resolve will find their way through, and opportunities will come the other side.
Yeah, definitely. Your experience in the property market, when we were speaking upstairs, you know, you've invested mainly in Spain. Can you talk to the audience and our listeners about your experience in the property sector? I know it wasn't a massive
No, it wasn't. I mean, I spent a lot of time. I was going to do some deals with Nick and Christian Candy, and I didn't because we fell out over something. I watched what John Caldwell did in Mayfair because he's a friend of mine. But what I was doing was I was living in Spain at the time. And the Spanish market is a fascinating phenomenon in terms of, at times, it almost defies conventional thinking in terms of the exponential growth. But what I did was I bought and developed 37 properties in the south of Spain. I did it with Spain's biggest developer. It was a brownfield site, off plan. They were building 90 houses. I decided to buy all 90. And Sir John Hall, one of this country's leading commercial property developers that built the Metro Centre up in Newcastle, said, "What's the matter with you? Why have you got to buy 90 of the properties? Why don't you just buy a select few with the right orientation?" So I ended up buying about 37. The challenges for me were the developer, Spain's biggest developer, Fidesa, were running into all kinds of economic problems. The deal worked well. It was structured well for me. Economically, the way that I was funding the transaction and the values of the property and leveraging the banks into a position where ultimately they funded the transaction for me, and being able to have a very buoyant marketplace turned a 10, 12, 13 million pound investment into a 25, 26 million pound return. But the last phase of properties was the problem for me, because the Spanish marketplace, albeit mature in some of the things that you guys are experiencing now, you guys are experiencing regulation around insulation and EPC. All of that sort of stuff has been in situ in Spain for quite some time. So it's priced into the thinking, because the way that the south of Spain is being built out, it's being built out with a lot of new properties. Because if you look at the way that the Spanish build houses, they'll stand up for about a week. But most of the developers are building to a different spec. So it produced good outcomes, but the last phase of about 12 properties, which was about 2 or 3 million quid that a developer owed me, they reneged on because they lost what's called a first occupation license in Spain, which is effectively an ability to be able to sell on. This was a retail play for me rather than a property portfolio that I was going to rent and leverage with a 16% yield or whatever I wanted. I wanted a straightforward retail proposition. And so what it left me with was 3 years of suing a Spanish bank who issued the bank guarantees to underpin the development deal for the money that I put in. But the transaction itself was a great deal, just hard yards and structured. And fortunately and unfortunately for me, because I've got a lot of investments in lots of different businesses like football clubs where huge losses have incurred, I have a lot of capital losses that I can utilise. So when I've got capital gains profits, I'm in a good position.
And just touching on that subject, obviously you're in the media as well, but there was a few different articles that was out on what happened in Spain. And when we was talking upstairs, leads us on to talking about the media. Not everything in the media is factual, as you were saying.
Most of it isn't.
It's very influential. What's your take on that place? Obviously, you've stepped into that space to try and shake it up, and as you put the wrong from the right, so to speak. So,
well, I didn't have, because when you buy a football club at 31 years of age, when you make films and you write best-selling books and you do stage plays and you own magazines and you've got well-known friends and well-known girlfriends, you make yourself a target for certain sections of the media. And then what then happens is that a good story doesn't get in the way of fact. And so my attitude towards the media for years was always, it's a vacuous place of disingenuous know-nothings that are blowhards that are normally promoting an agenda and don't really have so much substance behind some of the things that they're saying and some of the things that they're doing. 3 or 4 years ago, I was in Spain with a couple of restaurants that I owned or invested in, and some property, and a few tech startups that I was involved in. And I was given an opportunity, do you want to do some media stuff? And I said, no, not really. I don't like the media. I dislike them intensely. And then I did a few bits of media. And what I saw was, like in most things in life, scarcity sells. There's nobody in sports media, and it's low-hanging fruit to some extent, that owned a Premier League football club, that spent the kind of money and lost the kind of money that I did, that's speaking in the media. So what I did was started to enjoy the experience of correcting some of the nonsense, some of the disingenuity, some of the hyperbole, and some of the lack of authenticity that exists in the media space. And then it became this sort of mushroom cloud of the show that I do, which is a frequent show. It's probably the biggest sports show in the country. It's got audiences of 1.5 million a day, which if you know anything about media, is a significant audience. And what you've got is an opportunity. When you get into the media, there's very few people in the media that have the courage of their convictions to say what they really mean, whatever the subject will mean. My position is economically, the media doesn't drive me. So that means when I want to speak about challenging subjects, whether it's racism in sport or whether it's the Ukraine war and the participation of our country's involvement in certain things which dovetail into the world of sports, I can address that. I've got a partner that works in the media herself. So now I began to look at the media world very differently because it's an influence play. Like the Middle Eastern guys are buying brands in this country like football clubs, it has influence. What I do is I want to look at the way that the media present. We've got this needle at this moment. The last 2 or 3 years, there's only been one version of a conversation where the people wanted to talk about COVID, or they want to talk about inflation, or they want to talk about thorny societal issues, whether that be transgenderism or whether it be racism or whatever it be. There's one version, and if you don't fall into that camp, then all of a sudden people want to cancel you, or they want to have an inability to be able to have a proper grown-up debate. I think that the media needle is switching again. You know,
does that happen in the media? If your view's not taken, you know, you get cut out pretty easily.
Yeah, but then again, you've got to have responsibility in what you say. I mean, if you want to be a red top merchant like Piers Morgan and go for the low-hanging fruit and turn around and say to a union leader, you look like the hood, as your primary discussion about how we should be debating the strikes of the transport unions, well, that's low-level stuff. But if you want to get to the subject matter, because we've got a lot of people in this country that have very strong views that aren't being given a voice, and they're being led by certain cultures, whether you believe in the world of wokery or you believe in the world of certain aspects of certain people's politics. But I think most people in business sectors, in society, can take the truth as long as they believe that the person that's advancing that particular brand of the truth is doing it from an authentic position. So what I do, to coin a phrase, is I go hard or I go home, and I don't duck a subject. And that's given me a unique position in the media now, so where I can pretty much, within reasonable levels, do what I want in the media. I work with a brilliant platform, which produces brilliant content, and now I'm in a situation where I'm now looking at my own media platform, looking at the verticals of VOD content, looking at the digital space. I think the next media barons are coming out of digital, and I don't see any reason why someone like me wouldn't be in a position to do that, having learnt how it all holds together.
Talking, we're talking about the subject of Crystal Palace. And the media failures. Let's go back to when you first took over as Crystal Palace chairman. You know, what fueled that decision to, number one, purchase the club? You was obviously successful. You had money. You wanted to buy a football club. Take us through the decision-making process of buying that club.
I had the money, and I had the ego. I mean, people buy football clubs for a variety of different reasons. They buy them for credibility, recognizability, influence, sometimes ego. My father had played for the club. I was born 100 yards away from the stadium. I'd come from an industry that I felt had lent to great growth and ambition. I thought the sports businesses were going that way. I had a natural affinity to Crystal Palace, and I felt that I had the outlook and attitude to embrace the challenges that were coming down the channel with new broadcast deals, with technology evolving, having come from a tech industry that was delivering content and we were moving from analog to digital and all that digital brought, I felt that sport would present a challenge. It's a bit like that Dr. Pepper adverts where they turn around and say, how bad do you think it can be?
Yeah.
Well, buy a football club and you'll find out. It's a challenge. Yeah.
And what was the biggest challenge? Because obviously there must have been some good times as well as some bad times.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like a negative old bastard, but the good times are, you've got to grab hold of the good times. I didn't appreciate them as much as I could have done. I bought a side that I said I wanted to put in the Premier League in 5 years. I put it in 4 years. What you find is that sports is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful business for the people that are participants in it, i.e. the players, the managers, and the agents, and the broadcasters. But for the owners of football clubs, it's a thankless, unrewarding task. It's economic, distressed in its greatest at times. But there is a real value in sports. And so, whilst I didn't appreciate it the way I should have done. I didn't leverage it. What people do with big businesses like sports that are basically SMEs, because their turnover is quite small, but as an influence play, they're quite influential. They reach out and capture the hearts and souls and the minds of people, and you can leverage that if you want to. I was interested in winning, and I was interested in operating to high standards. And unfortunately, in certain sections of sport, as we might have just seen with the Australians playing cricket, if you're the only person in the room with integrity, you're going to walk out sometimes with a bit of difficulty. So when you're 31 and you're walking in a room with the average chairman being 65 years of age, and you've got a lot of ambition and a lot of direction and a lot of energy, you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of some conversations. And you've got to learn.
What did that feel like?
Well, at the time, you're not aware, are you? And then you find out with the benefit of hindsight, the challenges that you have. You're going to find out that you perhaps spent money that you didn't need to. You're going to find out that there's a resistance to you. You're going to find out there's a categorization of you. And like everything, if you're prepared to learn, I think you should be a quick study. I think you should get fooled once. And if you start getting fooled twice and 3 times, then you deserve what you get. But it's one of those unique businesses where you're putting yourself in the hands of people that make decisions for you, because it's a public domain business, because what you do is subject to a variety of different people's opinions. You operate sometimes in a different way, and you've got to separate the natural desire to be reactive and proactive and ambitious with the reality of your own circumstances, and you can't buy into the bullshit of what the media tell you that you are. You can't buy into the hyperbole of what the industry tells you you should be doing, because there's a lot of mythology, a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of double standards. But the thing is, when you go into a place where the establishment's been set, if you start changing the establishment, then you become the establishment. And then a different generation of people then want to change what you've done. But I think when I came in at 31 years of age, the mantra was, the best football club owners are the ones that you've never heard of, right? Now, I was very different. Now look at football. If you don't know the guys that own football clubs, there's something wrong. And I wasn't prepared to be in the background. I realised that the talent were the players. I realised the talent was the managers. But I was the standard bearer. I was the money. I was the leader. I was the person that decided the direction of travel. And I was the person that held people to the highest standards. That's why, despite the economic challenges I had, I built a football club that punched way above its weight. Way above its weight. You've got guys that are spending 300, 400 million quid to achieve what I achieved for 50 million quid. And I'm not suggesting I'm a poster boy for how to do it, because I wasn't, because I got damaged in the football industry. But I was pretty good at driving the business and motivating people and inspiring people and leading people and finding solutions to problems rather than just simply seeing the problem.
What was your biggest weakness as the chairman of Crystal Palace?
My biggest regret is allowing the media to portray me as a pantomime villain, because I wouldn't have any of the nonsense, because I wasn't frightened of anybody. I didn't respect the protocols and the mythology of the industry. I didn't respect the orthodoxy or the conventional wisdom. I said, that doesn't make sense. So I regret, and I also didn't care to some extent, and you should always care, what I said in the media or what people thought of me. because my pursuit was of what I wanted. And sometimes, you know, you get places because of people rather than in spite of people. So my biggest regret was that. And the challenges were always somewhere along the lines of dovetailing into the biggest regrets. You know, getting into the Premier League was an achievement. Not being able to stay there as long as I wanted to was a failure. Every time I appointed a manager, and that manager was fired by me, and I fired a lot of managers, it was a failing on my part because I failed to get from them what I saw. But I suspect the biggest failing or the biggest challenge for me was my own ambition. You know, there's a time when, there's an old expression, isn't there? Quitting whilst you're ahead is not the same as quitting, right? And you've got to know when that is. And you've got to know when you walk away leaving people wanting more rather than less. And those are lessons that age and experience and maturity and understanding of an industry will teach you.
Say that one of the managers was here, what would they say you was like to work with, or players, anybody that was at Palace at that time?
Demanding. Fair, blunt, direct, to the point. I held people to account. I did what I said I was going to do. I always did what I said I was going to do. And if someone didn't do what they said they were going to do, then I held them to account for it. I think there'll be people that, on the whole, I would suspect that most people say that you knew where you stood with him. There's good and bad in that. I think there's a merit in letting people clearly know what you think. Some people think to operate in a manner which is slightly surreptitious and necessarily not so confrontational is a better way. But I think it's better to not waste people's time, including your own. You know, when I used to fire people, my expression was, I don't know how we're going to get along without you, but as from Monday, we're going to try. Because I'd be that blunt and to the point, because I didn't want my time wasted and I didn't want to waste theirs. So I think they'd say I was fair and demanding, but not someone that didn't give them the tools of their trade.
You give them everything they needed to do to be able
I gave them what they deserved.
A fair crack of the whip.
I gave them what they deserved.
And I'm a Tottenham supporter, so there's a few of us. It's a shame, but we have to be.
Good club.
As a chairman, as a former chairman, what do you think of Daniel Levy allowing Harry Kane to go into his last year nearly being out of contract?
Well, the characterisation of that question is wrong, because it's not a case of allowing anybody to do anything. It's not Daniel Levy's gift to determine what Harry Kane does.
He could have tied him up.
And you would,
a little bit
and one would imagine Daniel Levy, as I know Daniel Levy, would have attempted to do that. But like most things in football, you're through the looking glass, and what you think it is often not what it is. Harry Kane will be positioning himself. He tried to position himself last year, you know, using people to move him to another football club. I'm not surprised that Daniel finds himself in a position with Harry Kane that he finds himself in, but I'm also not convinced that the outcomes still will not be able to be manipulated into Tottenham's best advantage. Now, whether that's Kane staying for another season, and they write off 50 million quid or 60 million quid or whatever Bayern Munich are prepared to pay in exchange for achievements, or they find a mechanism to get Harry to sign a new contract.
What do you think will happen?
I think he'll sign a new contract. I know that's not a popular opinion. I know that's not an opinion that people that perceive Harry Kane as being motivated by having to win trophies, and if he doesn't go now, he's never going to go. But I think Daniel thinks there's a distinct possibility that he might be able to get him to sign a new contract. We'll see.
On your platform, you spoke and you speak about, obviously, various different players throughout. You've had a pop slightly at Man United's Anton, saying it's probably very expensive and not a great player. What makes you come up with that opinion? Just because of what you've seen?
Well, I don't think
he can grow into being a good player?
I don't think it's having a go at somebody. I think it's called critical observation. The trouble with sports, I'm looking at boxing and maybe getting involved in boxing. Because I haven't had my fix of losing money yet. But I think there's a problem in society where people can only take praise, they can't take criticism. And I think criticism needs to be fair. It needs to be structured. It needs to be objective. It doesn't need to be personalised. in terms of with a personal agenda being served out. And if you're gonna stand an argument, one of the things that I do in the media is I will stand an argument up. If you want to come and have a debate with me, bring your best game, because I'm not going to let you get away with platitudes. I'm not going to let you turn around and say something without the ability to stand it up and support it. And I'll stand at my end. And if a debate ensues, and that debate means that your point's better than mine, then that's fine, because I'll have learned something. So I made an observation about a £90 million footballer, because I'm sick to the back teeth of how much these players are getting and what the perceived value of them is. And somebody asked me a question about a particular player in conjunction with Manchester United. And I can't be bothered to fanny about. If you want to ask me a question, I'll give you an answer. You know, and I think there's a lot more of that that's required in the media, direct questions to direct answers. If we had politicians that A, had the capability, or B, the balls and chutzpah to actually answer questions rather than deflect to maintain an agenda, which is unsustainable in the first place anyway, then we might be a bit more of an informed society. And I think there's a lot more to be said about people answering. If you can stand it up, we can all say rubbish. We can all say things to people that are derogatory or gain and garner a reaction, but can you stand them up? And if you buy a £90 million footballer and he doesn't do his job on a variety of reasons, there'll be a whole litany of people behind him, wiping his backside, telling him the reasons why he should have excuses for that. And then there's the real world, the space that I live in, which is, you know, we've got to be better than that. We want people to be accountable.
I agree. Talking of players, obviously, what would you say was a good signing of last season?
For who?
In the Premier League, as a whole. You know, we've spoken about bad
obvious,
signings.
isn't it?
Erling
Haaland.
I mean, obviously we're going to talk about, but let's put him to one side. Who else would you say has made a good purchase in your opinion?
Currently or last season?
Last season. We're talking about last season.
I think United have made a couple of decent signings. I think if you look across the pantheon of who's bought well and who often buys well, I think Manchester City and Erling Haaland is an obvious example. You look at Arsenal and some of the purchases that they've made that are coming to fruition. So, you know, I don't tend to spend my time focusing on who has bought players well. I tend to focus my time on what the outcomes are as a result of the team, because the team is sum of all its parts.
So a good team, which hurts me to say it, had a great season last year, Arsenal.
Yeah, absolutely. There's still a lot to go, still a lot of development, still a lot of challenges, showed a lot of frailties and fragilities, and they need to do better than what they did last year, because Man City won the league because Arsenal fell away.
Yeah. What else is there from you? What are you looking at doing? We spoke about football, we spoke about the media. Simon Jordan as a person, you spoke to me about obviously the platform that you're looking to do.
Sure.
Any other business opportunities that you're looking at, or anything that you've got
in the pipeline? I think my days of building businesses that have 2,000 or 3,000 members of staff are probably done. I have a young son. I would prefer to be at home in Spain. But my partner works in the British media and wants to be here and wants our son here. So what it will mean for me is probably investments. I have various media plays that I can get involved with if I want to. I can probably do a lot more media if I choose to. I'm currently doing a lot of media, and I don't know how much more I want to do of it, but that notwithstanding. And I just look at opportunities. I'm more interested in doing deals and deploying capital and making capital work. Now, whether that's in the property market, because I see distressed opportunities, with I'm not being glib or smart that other people's distress will produce an opportunity, but let's be realistic about where we are in the world. And so, from that point of view, I'm very open-minded. You know, I've built retail businesses, I've had manufacturing businesses, I've had healthcare businesses. I built a digital business 5 or 6 years ago that was in the smoking cessation business. You know, I've written best-selling books, I've made films, I've developed stage plays. So anything that's got a risk attached to it, I like. But also, I like things that expand and have opportunities to expand. So I'm very open-minded. You know, I get this embarrassment of riches, specifically in the sports sector, to talk about developments, whether it's in the concussion area of development around the well-being of sports stars, or whether it's, or whether it's in sectors where we're evolving certain aspects of society.
Yeah.
I like anything that's challenging. I launched a magazine called Octane, which was a car magazine.
Yep.
And I loved my cars. I had as many supercars as you can shake a stick at. I don't have them anymore because I've got older and wiser. And so I like marketplaces that are interesting, that have opportunity attached to it, but because of my personality, will have a margin of risk involved in it.
Was it true that the magazine come through a supporter at Crystal Palace?
Yeah.
Was the idea behind that?
Well, I was offered the first series of Dragon's Den.
Okay.
And I didn't want to do it, so I think Theo Profitis, my friend, went and did it. But I'd been doing the very same thing that Dragon's Den had been doing for about 2 years. I lived in the Grosvenor House Hotel for 10 years. A bit of a Salvador Dali-esque sort of existence. And what I had was in the boardroom at the Grosvenor, I had a team of people, Arthur Andersons, who at the time, before they were discredited and shamed over the Enron scandal, were the biggest accountants in the world. So I took the two guys that structured the £100 million deal did on mobile telephony and got them to come and work for me. One, go find me deals. The other, go and structure them efficiently. So I had this every Friday, businesses would come and pitch me with their ideas.
Okay.
One of them was Innocent Smoothies, which I turned down. Not my smartest move. And another one was Octane, the car magazine. And they came through a friend of mine in Marbella. I was over there buying the property that I talked about and spending time living over there. He knew the friend of mine that owned a restaurant that I invested in, and he was introduced to me and pitched a situation surrounding a magazine because I liked cars, because I saw the opportunity for a product that went into a certain sector. Media, and I was also looking at the media world going, I'm making films, I'm owning restaurants, I've got a Premier League football club. I should be building an entertainment business, and one of those should be a magazine. And because I could get Rowan Atkinson and Nick Mason to write big articles in the magazine, it became a success. And I sold my shareholding 2 years later for I think about 5 times the investment.
You put in. So another good opportunity.
Yeah, I like to talk about the successes. Yeah, they're good. Yeah, they appeal to me.
I'm pretty much done with questions. I've covered quite a bit from media, football, Crystal Palace. Is there anything that I've missed that you think that the audience would find interesting about yourself?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it depends how interested they are in sports, and depends how interested they are in the landscape of society. I've got lots of views about the way society's going. I've got lots of views about the challenges that society's got, whether it's issues around inclusion, diversity, whether it's issues around transgender, whether it's the structure of this country, whether the nature of sport and the current regime of Middle Eastern money pouring into sport, the assets of
well, let's talk about that. Obviously, there's a lot of money going into the likes of football teams at the minute from Saudi. What is your take on that?
Well,
Are you happy with the money coming over?
No one had a problem with the Candy Boys taking fortunes off the Maktoums and building as many properties as they could. Nobody's had a problem with putting their head down if they live in London or stayed in London at the Savoy. Nobody worried about introducing characters onto Twitter when the Middle Eastern money was there. There is a concern for me that Middle Eastern money, certainly in sports, comes with a different agenda than sports. But I went to Qatar for the World Cup. I'm not one of those that believes that we've got the zeitgeist in this country to be going over to other parts of the world and lecturing them about the societal challenges. Yes, I know. In a civilized society, equality for everybody from their sexual orientation to their ethnicity must form part of a civilized society. But also, every society evolves at a different pace. The challenge for me with the Middle Eastern side of things, certainly in sport, is I don't think people really understand the level of money that these nation states have. In this country, we have a balance of payments deficit, and our GDP is dramatically exceeded by the cost implications of our society. But in countries like Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, they have trillions and trillions of dollars of excess cash. So with that means that they can buy huge investments or invest in big projects. They can use sports as a vehicle for image enhancing and for influence. I'm not one of those people that says, hang on a second, we shouldn't have Middle Eastern investment. I'm more inclined in sports to say there should be a degree of governance.
Yeah.
So
I mean, is it good for
the
sport?
ecosystem? Well, is it good
Is it
for
good
sports?
for the Premier League, for these? As a chairman, would you be happy if you was a chairman now with them coming over and doing what's happening?
If the governance of sport is fit, when I had this conversation with Nasser Al-Khelafi, and I said to him, I don't like you guys and what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you're breaking the ecosystem. And his answer to me was very, Nasser Al-Khelafi is the head of the Qatari Sports Investments, one of the wealthiest guys in the world, and also the owner of Paris Saint-Germain, which is a big football club in Paris.
Yeah.
And his argument was very simple, Reece. We'll get proper governance then and enforce it. And he's right. So that kind of doesn't take the air out of my argument. But as we know, with the challenges around Middle Eastern investment into Manchester City and the backdrop of that, and the current situation in America with the Saudis wanting to buy the PGA, and the Americans are going to have very little of that because they don't like nation-state ownership. I'm always disappointed that there's not enough inward investment in this country, that we seem to want to sell everything to overseas investors, whether it be the London Stock Exchange a few years ago that we were going to sell to the Germans, or whether it be influential community assets like football clubs. But the alternate argument is, would you prefer this money to land in Spain or Italy?
Yeah.
I think there's a balance that needs to be struck, but I think you do need to, I sat in this strange conversation with Russell Band, who's a good mate of mine, talking about corporatism and invisible influence. And whilst I think Russell talks in platitudes without some depth sometimes that needs to be behind the arguments, I do think it needs to be looked at very carefully. But we are a country steeped in hypocrisy. I did a podcast the other day with Victoria Azarenka, the tennis player, who's a friend of mine, and she's a Belarusian. And we've got this big societal backlash, of course, against the situation in Ukraine. And then we're telling people like Belarusian athletes that never asked for their flag to be put above their name at a tennis tournament, that don't live in that country anymore, telling them that they shouldn't play in tournaments because propaganda for Putin or Lukashenko, the Belarusian president. But then we're allowed in Saudi to come and buy assets over here whilst they're dropping bombs on Yemen.
Yeah.
So there's a real degree of hypocrisy in society. But for me, it's about trying to get balance and equitability and a degree of honesty and forthrightness in the way that you do business. But then again, if you're dealing with politicians, you're wasting your breath on that.
Well, Simon, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure interviewing you and bringing you to the show. Hopefully you all found it interesting. Thanks again. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. Thank you.